Everyone, this is Felix from GMWolf. Today, what we're looking at are shaders, what they are and how to use them. So, first of all, let's define what shaders are. So, basically, there are small programs that allow you to define the way in which graphics should be displayed. So you can change the information about you can give information to a graphics card in order to change the way in which you're drawing your graphics. Before we're going to go into how exactly this works, I think it's quite important to have a quick look at how we normally have some default rendering. So in GameMaker, what you have is your application surface here and our screen. So our application surface is where we're going to draw all our sprites before drawing everything to the screen. This allows us to have all of the sprites appearing at the same time without having the sprites popping up one after the other really quickly. This actually can be noticeable. It shouldn't happen on GameMaker because I think there's another buffer in there, but if you've worked using Java or some other programming languages, you may know what I'm talking about. So what happens during default rendering is you first define your vertices. So for a normal sprite, what you have in general is just two triangles, and then your sprite will be filled inside it, like so. Once your sprite is drawn, and all the other ones too, the application surface simply applied onto the screen, and you have your sprite drawn there. Now, using shaders, we can do a lot more. So, first of all, we define our vertices like before. However, now we have the ability to change the information about each vertex. So this could be the position of them, we can change stuff like the texture coordinates, we can change their color, etc. Once we've done that, we can then start drawing the sprites, and all the transformations will be applied. So, as you can see here, it's been rotated. Now, shaders also allow us to do something else, and that is change the actual value of each individual pixel. This can be used to change the color of the pixels, to do other effects such as blurring, etc. And once we have drawn our sprites, we then apply it to the screen like so. So, without further ado, let's jump into GameMaker, see how we actually create a shader, how we use a shader, even how to program a shader. So what I have here is just this very simple project. All I have is this sprite over here of a color wheel. I'm using this because we have all the colors on here. It is nice and easy to visualize what's going to happen. I just called it SPI test, made it pretty big, 256 pixels, just to make sure it was big enough on screen. And I have one object with that sprite applied, just the sprite, and called it obj test, nothing else. And finally, the room with just our object in the middle. I made it smaller just so it was about the right size. However, I'm just going to go into view right now, and just to make sure it is big enough on screen for you guys, I'm going to enable ease of use, visible when we start. So let's see, let's go into the settings, copy my width and height. I'm just going to put this in view in room, and increase the ports on screen to about twice that amount, so 640, like so, just to make sure it's big enough for you guys. And if I press play, you'll see that what we have is our sprite in the center of our room, scaled up 2 times, and nothing special is happening right now. So before we actually start creating anything interesting with shaders, let's just look at how to use a very basic shader. So to use a shader, you need to have a shader inside your project. To do so, you can click on this button up here, right next to Create Scripts. It's underneath the Marketplace beta. It is the one on the right. Just click it once, and it shall create this new shader over here. It's called a shader 0, and it has some basic code in it. As you can see, it says it's a very simple pass-through vertex shader. So the first thing to notice is that we have these 2 sections over here. The first one being the vertex shader, the second being our fragment shader. So the vertex shader is the part of the shader that allows you to change the information about each of the vertices, and the fragment shader is the part of the shader that allows you to change the information about each of the pixels. As you can see, the pixel shader is really quite simple. It's really short, but the vertex shader is a little bit more complicated. Now, before we go into what all this code here does, let's just look at how to use them inside GameMaker, just applying the shader on top of an object. So let's call it shd underscore simple. Let's press OK and open obj test. Now what we have to do is set the shader, draw our sprite, and then reset the shader. So we have to go and add an event, draw, just a simple drawing event. Let's add a piece of code and do shader underscore set. And we want to type in a shader, shd underscore simple. So this will say that the current shader we're going to use in order to draw objects is our shader simple. Now we want to draw a sprite. Now because we applied it to the object, etc., we can just do draw underscore self. This will just simply draw the object like it normally does, with all the transformations, including all the color, etc. You could just use draw sprite or draw background, anything you like. You can use every single drawing script in there. The shader will change the way in which it's drawn. Now, after having set the shader, we want to reset the shader to use the default shader that's built into GameMaker, just to have the normal default drawing system. It's quite important that you do so, otherwise the rest of your screen may go a bit out of hand. So let's do shader underscore reset, shd underscore, just shader reset. We don't have to give any arguments for that one. Let's press OK and press play. So what is going to happen normally is absolutely nothing, because our shader is a simple shader that does not affect our sprite at all. However, it is being applied, we don't have any errors. Great. So this is how to use your shaders. As you can see, it is really quite simple. You set your shader, you draw what you want to draw, and you reset your shader. So now let's have a look at how to edit our shader so it does something interesting to our object, to our sprite. So let's open up the shader, and we're just going to go into the fragment part for now. It is slightly easier to understand. So first, let's have a look at the two first lines that are in here. The first one is here varying vec2 v underscore v text chord. So what that is, well, first of all, the varying keyword here basically means that it is a piece of information that is being passed by our vertex shader. The vec2 is here to indicate that it is a 2D vector, and this is just the name, which is the texture coordinate. Oh, sorry. The next thing here is again varying, this time a 4-dimensional vector, and this is a color. The reason it's a 4-dimensional vector is because you have the the R, G, B, and alpha components in a color. This here void main means it is the main function that is going to be executed, and inside we have our code. GLFrag color over here is the final color that is going to be displayed onto the screen. Here the equal sign is simply setting the GLFrag color to whatever is on the right. So here what we're having is we're multiplying our vertex color by texture 2D over here. So texture 2D is a function that will get the pixel from a texture given a certain coordinate. So we're giving the first thing here, which is our sampler, which is also called a texture. That is GM based texture, which is the basic texture you're drawing at the moment. You can have more than one texture at a time, and I'll show you how to do that later on. And next we have v underscore v text chord. This is simply our texture coordinate, because we want the pixel from that texture coordinate. Excuse me, I'm probably going to cough a lot. I have a cold. So what we want to do now is change it a little. So what we can do is only have a red color, for example. So let's take this out over here and actually take out the whole line and simply write vec4, because we want a color which is a 4-dimensional vector. So we want the red component, which is going to be 1.0 because we want to be fully red. The green and blue are going to be 0, and finally the alpha wants to be 1.0. Sorry. The reason why we have 0.0 at the end every time is because we want those to be floating point values, not integer values. Basically, every time you have a number, put 0.0 at the end in shaders. That just allows it to work without any compile errors. The reason for it is a bit more advanced and I don't have the time to get into it. So let's press OK and simply press play and see if our whole image turns red, which it should. And here you go, the whole image has turned red. However, the alpha has been clipped out, so let's have a look at how we can add the alpha back in. What we can do is create a new variable here called float, let's call it alpha, and make that equal to texture 2D. Again, excuse me, I have a really sore throat. And the sampler 2D is our texture, which is the basic texture we're putting in, which is GM_base texture. And then our vec2 is going to be our v_v text chord. And let's now change this number at the end to alpha. Now this right now is actually returning a vec4, and we just want the alpha component of it, so we're doing the .a, and that will give us the alpha component of it at the end. Let's press save and press play. And as you can see, we have our alpha value back. So as you can see, it is really quite simple to add different effects. You can go on, do a lot of different things. You can add another, you can do a lot more. There's a whole bunch of functions out there. I'm not going to go into how to do anything particularly interesting. No, excuse me. Simply because it is not the point of this tutorial. Now, something else that happened that you may have in shaders are uniforms. You'll find them quite often. And just for this video, I'm going to show you how to add a uniform to your shader and how to use it. And this uniform is simply going to change what color we're going to draw here. So we're going to add a uniform in our shader. So we need to have the keyword uniform. A color, we just want the RGB component, so we're going to do vec3. And we're going to call it u_color for uniform color. Now we're going to go over here, and instead of 1,0,0, we're going to put u_color. Now, if I press play now, we should have a completely black circle because we're not giving it any information. So we'll just read it as a 0. So let's have a look at how we can send the information to our shader. The first thing we need to do is add an event create. Let's put a piece of code, and what we need to do is get our uniform index. So we're going to do shader_get uniform. We need the name of our shader with shd_simple and the name of our uniform. Now if we open it up over here, we can see that it was called u_color. Let's copy that and paste it. Now we actually needed to send it as a string because it needs to check the inside of the code, so we're gonna place the two quotation marks around it, and that should get our shader uniform. However, we do need to set it to something, and we're going to set it to a variable, and I'm going to call that uniform I'm going to call that uniform u_color. It can really be called anything, and actually I'm going to call it u_c. So u_c is equal to shader_get uniform shd_simple, u_color. Press OK. Now let's go into the draw event, and inside the shader set I'm going to add shader_set uniform, and it is a floating point. It is a float, yeah. And what we're going to have here is our uniform ID, which was u_c, and then our values. Now let's say we want it to be green, so this RGB. So you want 0. Let's have a small value here, like 0.2. No, G. Let's have 1.0. And let's have 0.2 again, for example. This should give us a nice greenish color. If I press play, we should get a greenish color being displayed onto the screen. Here you go, nice green color. So that is how we add uniforms to our shader. Now what we want to do is add different textures to it. So we can actually pass several different textures, and I'm going to do so by first creating a blue sprite. Let's create one, just call it SPR pass, maybe, I don't know. Add the sprite. Make it nice and big. What I'm going to do is take this brush over here, make some nice squiggly lines, like so. Could be anything. Excuse me. So what we're going to do is go inside our shader. Now we're going to just take this out over here, just make it so that it's this basic shader over here. So what we have is simply GL flag color is equal to texture 2D, GM base texture, V underscore V text core. That should just make it the basic shader without the V underscore V color part. And what we're going to do is multiply it with another shader, another texture. So what I want to have here is uniform sampler 2D. Whoops, caps lock is on. Uniform sampler 2D. I'm going to call that S underscore text. So a sampler 2D is simply a texture. And now we are going to have over here times texture 2D S underscore text, and I'll need vector coordinates text chord. So what we're doing here is multiplying this texture by this texture. So excuse me. Yeah. So let's press OK, and let's have a look at how we can now pass that shader in, that texture in. Sorry. So what we need to do is get something called texture sampler index, I think. So shader underscore get sampler index. Our shader is shd underscore simple, and our uniform is s underscore text, I think. Yeah. So just like the uniforms, we set that to a variable. So let's call that sampler text is equal to shader get sampler index. In the draw event, we need to get the texture from the sprite. So sprite get texture. Our sprite is SPR pass submit 0. We're going to set that to something called text. And now here we're going to take out this line because it's not needed anymore. I'm going to do shader set. Sorry, that's not right. We want to do texture set stage. Set stage. Our sampler ID is I can't actually remember. It's right here. Sampler text. And our texture ID is text. And that should send it should pass through our texture that we calculated here into our shader and multiply it. So let's press play and see what happens. Excuse me. And it did not work for some reason. And quite frankly, I don't know why. So let's have a look at what we wrote. And it does all look correct. So now it's going to be a bit of debugging that we're going to have to do. There could be a whole load of different reasons why this is not working. And it could just be a typo or something like that. Maybe we have to set this before the shader set. I'm not quite sure that is the problem though. I always said it inside it. No, that is not the problem. So I'm gonna have to debug this off camera. Well, the problem might be is that in a SPR pass we don't have use of 3D, and we are getting a texture over here. So we have to make use for 3D in order to get the correct texture. So if we press play now, we should see it working. And it is working pretty nicely. However, we do get all those white spots here, and it's because it's multiplying the alpha. So what I want to do is go into here, go image, we want to go into opacity, anti-relative, go full, and it's not going to fill in everything, is it? So what we can do is simply select everything, cut it out, fill everything white, paste it back in, and now we have an opacity of 1. So it should multiply it by 1 and not 0 this time. And what we get is just the blacks being overlaid on top. This can be used with any color as well, so just to show we're not just overlaying, we are actually using the shader like it's supposed to be. If I put the green blob over here and press play, we should get it to overlay nicely, like so. So this is how to use the different textures inside a shader, and that pretty much wraps up excuse me, the video. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, despite my constant coughing, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time for some more videos.